In your late 30s, again, often depending on your ethnicity, you might start
Yeah.
to experience those symptoms. But certainly from the early 40s onwards, the majority of us, regardless of ethnicity, will be sort of lurking around that perimenopausal phase. So I
Yeah.
think the first thing to do, as I mentioned earlier, really is inform yourself. Forewarned is forearmed. So, even if you think, well, none of that sounds familiar to me just yet, but we don't have enough education out there. We learn about all sorts of other things, in sex education at school, but menopause is just not something that was covered when we were
Yeah.
at school. And you need to think about how you're going to look after yourself, because self-care is really important. And we women are hardwired to look after everyone else.
You're listening to Empower Her, the podcast curated for busy women aged 35 and beyond. If you're feeling stuck and unfulfilled in your health, wealth, or well-being, then get ready to be empowered to take action so that you can start achieving anything within a set time frame that works for your lifestyle. I'm your host, Shreya Parekh, and together with my guests, we'll be providing knowledge, resources, and ideas to help you broaden your perspectives, learn more about yourself, and define your path to live your absolute best life. Be sure to hit that follow button to stay tuned with the podcast, and don't miss out on valuable free resources available on the website to support your journey. Hormone Replacement Therapy, also known as HRT, diet and nutrition. How can all this help with your perimenopause and menopause journey, and at what age should you be looking out for symptoms? Join me in this insightful podcast episode with Jackie Lynch, an award-winning nutritionist, author and founder of the Well Nutrition Clinic. Specialising in women's health and menopause, Jackie shares expertise featured in national media and appearances on Channel 4's Superfoods. We'll explore the significant impact of HRT, diet and nutrition on your perimenopause and menopause journey. Discover valuable insights on symptom management, food choices, and the effects of alcohol, addressing the influence of past lifestyle habits and providing practical advice for women seeking options. Jackie, welcome to the Empower Her podcast. It's fantastic to have you on. Please could you let us know a little bit about your journey from what you were doing to what you're doing now? That will be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Well, I'm a nutritionist, but I wasn't always a nutritionist. In fact, when I was age 40, I gave up a big corporate job and went back to school to study for 4 years and qualified in 2010. So prior to what I'm doing now, I actually worked in sales and marketing for intellectual property. So TV and film rights, ancillary rights. I worked for BBC Worldwide, which is the commercial arm of the BBC. So promoting and marketing BBC programmes to French television initially, and then as time went on, I got more involved in the merchandising side of things. And because the kids market really exploded in the mid-90s, I did a lot of work on things like Teletubbies, Tweenies. And then I moved into the private sector, working for an organisation called Corian, where I was the director of sales and marketing. And that had some amazing intellectual property. They owned the Enid Blyton estate, so I got involved with Noddy and the Famous Five, which was great fun. I was involved in launching Noddy in China, which was quite the experience. And they owned Agatha Christie, Mr. Men, lots of really great property. So really fun to work with how you could exploit those beyond the visual medium of film and television, and looking at all manner of other different ways. But, it was great. I've loved every job I've ever had. But there came a time as I was approaching my 40s, I was thinking, well, what do I do next? Is this it? Hard to think with the brands that I've been working on that I could go somewhere else, because I was thinking, well, I don't want to work with, just a different company and brands that aren't as good. So I thought I was ready for a change, but I didn't really know what that change might be. And I was sort of very open, I think, at that point, looking back to something completely different. And I went on a spa holiday for a break because I did a lot of international travel. I was, busy, stressed, and went to this fabulous place in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains. And it's organized by a company called Inspire. And what they do is they block book bijou hotels in great places and then fly out their own team, their own chef, their own nutritionist, their own yoga teacher, personal trainer, etc. And you have the most amazing week there with this whole new regime. And honestly, I think it was perhaps the first time I really understood the role that food could play in how you feel. Because I wasn't ill, but I was, it had been a very busy time. I was stressed and tired. And within about 5 days, I felt like a whole new woman. I remember that I knew it was alcohol and caffeine free, but I hadn't realised it was wheat and dairy free because I didn't really check the small print. And I only realised that by about Wednesday when someone happened to mention it, because the food had been so amazing. I just hadn't noticed that those things weren't there. And it was a real insight to me as to the difference it could make. And I remember a year later going on another holiday with them in a different place, and it was after that I looked at their website and I was just reading it to see where I could go next with them, and I started reading the biogs of the different people who work with them, and all the nutritionists had the same qualification. And I looked it up, and it was at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in Richmond. And I remember reading the course description and thinking, oh, that's it, light bulb moment. That's what I'm doing next. And that was in the April. By the June, I'd handed my notice in. And by the October, I was walking into my first chemistry class, terrified.
Wow.
So, and the rest, as they say, is history, because, I qualified in 2010. I've set up my clinic. I specialize in women's health and the menopause. I've written 3 nutrition books. I have the Happy Menopause podcast. I've done all sorts of different things. It's just a fascinating world to be in, and quite the journey when I look back.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I recently was speaking with someone talking about the midlife period where people tend to kind of think, what next? And is this it? And we went into great detail about that. So it's absolutely fantastic that you actually took some time out to figure that out, and you are where you are now, which is great. So I wanted to speak, obviously, I know you specialize in nutrition for women that are going through perimenopause, menopause. To start with, I wanted to talk about the treatment options for perimenopause and menopause. What is there out there for women?
Well, there's loads of stuff, and I think that's the important thing. I think perhaps the first thing to recognise is that it all starts a lot earlier than you might think. And some of the symptoms you might experience are not the ones you were expecting. So the hot flushes, the period changes, that comes much later. Actually, from your early 40s onwards, hormonal changes can be going on in the background. And because it's very often progesterone that starts to fluctuate first, that can affect the sort of emotional, psychological, cognitive side of things. So for professional women who are used to commanding an audience in the boardroom, being perhaps giving presentations, or just simply being really good at remembering all that detail, suddenly find that they might have brain fog or a residual anxiety they've never experienced before, or simply just sort of mood swings and feeling that their fuse is a lot shorter. Yeah. And because your periods are still regular and you're not getting what you thought was the classic symptom of the hot flush, you might not recognize it as perimenopause. So I think that's the first thing that's worth doing. And then reaching out, inform yourself, because there are lots of options. For a start, there's the hormone replacement therapy. So a visit to the doctor is really important. You may think, well, I don't want to have it, and that's fine. It's your body, and it's absolutely right that you must do what is right for you. But it's also right that you inform yourself and you understand what it is, because you may think, oh, I'm worried about the risks. Well, do you actually know what the risk-benefit analysis is? For professional women who are used to operating in that context and thinking about things like return on investment, well, actually you need to think of yourself as that investment, and is it the right thing? It may be, it may not be, but you can't make an informed decision
Yeah.
unless you've looked into that. And women often worry and say, well, I went to the doctor and they didn't even take a blood test. But once you're over the age of 45, the recommended advice is that a blood test isn't really helpful, because the perimenopause goes up and down like a blooming yo-yo. And if
Yeah.
it's on the wrong day, your bloods could be completely normal. And so it would look as if your hormones were normal, except the next day they might not have been. So they'll be looking at your age and they'll be looking at your symptoms.
Mm.
And there's a lot of sort of misinformation out there, and unfortunately, some GPs are more informed than others, but there is sometimes a sense of, oh, well, you can't have HRT until after your periods have stopped. Well, that's not correct. You can. And in fact, again, for many women struggling with the cognitive or psychological symptoms, then that can be an absolute game changer, or it can support your sleep, or if you're struggling with fatigue or joint pain. There are all manner of ways that the menopause can affect you. So first, start to inform yourself, look at those things. There's some very useful things you can download, which are symptom checker lists, and you can sort of print it off and have a little look and think, oh, jeepers, actually about 20 of those are me. And then
Yeah.
that means that when you go in for that tiny 10-minute appointment,
Mm.
you're not asking the doctor to look at lots of different random symptoms, and
Yeah.
they may join different dots. You can show them straight away, which will help them get to that place perhaps a little bit earlier. So I think informing yourself about that, but also, of course, because I'm not medical, so I've given very broad general sort of advice there, but that's for your doctor to look at with you. For me, of course, the diet and lifestyle side of things is so important, whether you take HRT or not. If you choose not to, or if you can't, perhaps because you have a medical history that prevents that, for example, perhaps you've had a hormone sensitive cancer, then the diet and lifestyle side is crucial. But also worth understanding that that HRT is just a hormone. So you need to be aware that the body needs to know what to do with that, how to create the chain reactions. And that's where all the nutrients come in. So a really good diet alongside your HRT will make it work much better. So either way, it's a win-win looking at diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
But also, when I say lifestyle, it's not just all, don't drink, don't smoke. It's thinking more broadly, again, particularly for people who are either experiencing a lot of professional stress or perhaps emotional stress at home, in the home life, depending on what's going on there. Understanding the role of stress in exacerbating menopause symptoms, and what you can personally do to address that.
Mm. That's quite a lot there. That's amazing. I didn't realize that HRT you could take during the perimenopause. I thought it was something that you have once your periods stop. That was my assumption anyway. So that's definitely good to know. I mean, how do you know when to take it then? Because like you said, you have all these symptoms that come up in your early 40s, or perhaps maybe even earlier. Um, you're not really sure when to take it. So what would be that step, and how do you find out
Yeah.
more about it? And also, sorry, just to add, I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a postcode lottery. Is that correct?
Oh gosh. Okay, lots of questions there. Okay, so first of all, and you raise a really valid point, it might be earlier. And certainly there are some ethnicities, for example, Black women, studies have shown tend to go into menopause earlier, therefore the perimenopause will start earlier.
Yeah.
And if you're in your late 30s and that's going on, it's easy again to dismiss it. Well, the first thing to do always is to go to the doctor and, just rule out anything else. For example, many of the symptoms of an underactive thyroid are very similar to the symptoms of the menopause. Issues like sudden, weight gain, fatigue, anxiety, so constipation, lots of classic things that can cross over. So worth doing that. But the first thing you need to do, I always think, is get the basics right, because every woman has a different experience of menopause. About 20% of women have a terrible time of it. They get, pretty much any symptom under the sun, very, very severe, and they will all really struggle.
Mm.
There's another 20% who'll sail through it and wonder why we keep banging on about it all the time because, they're all right. And
Yeah.
then in the middle, there's about 60% of us who have some symptoms, not all, varying degrees of severity. That tends to give you more flexibility. So if things are debilitating and you can't function, then you shouldn't really be hesitating. Definitely speak to the doctor and get some advice about the HRT. If you're in the middle, you've got much more room for manoeuvre on deciding when to go for it, and bearing in mind that perimenopause, can last a long time, lasts years, and it may just be that things gradually get a bit more complicated for you, or that you just have a really bad 6 months, but actually everything else is more or less manageable. And that's where you need to start thinking about the diet side of things, because diet and exercise, so much research about the role that they can have. So you might find that just by tweaking things, getting the basics right. One of my guests recently said to me, the body tolerates bad behavior much less as you move into midlife. So we know what bad behavior is in relation to our diet. Doesn't mean you can't have the odd drink or the odd treat, but things you got away with in your 20s, you don't get away with as easily in your 40s. So, underpinning that, being kind to your body, and then you can assess and step back and think, well, okay, I think I've gone as far as I can with my diet and lifestyle, and actually I think I'm okay. Or you might think, well, I'm 60% better, but I still got X or Y niggling symptom. Let's go off and have a chat to the doctor. Now, when it comes to postcode lottery, my experience actually is that it's not so much a postcode lottery as a specific GP lottery. Some GPs are more informed than others. They all have their different expertise. It's always wise in your surgery to have a look at the one. They usually publish on their website what they're interested in. Some of them are interested in the kids, the pediatrics. Some are more interested into, perhaps they've got an expertise in mental health. And there's nearly always one who's got an expertise in women's health. So even if it may not be your usual GP, you can always ask to see them, because that's perfectly normal and understandable.
Yeah.
And if you don't get, hit gold first time, then, or you find, I often, in my clinic, women are often saying to me, oh, God, it's really difficult. My GP just won't listen to me. And I thought, well, just change GPs. Would you put up with this in a professional situation if a supplier wasn't, giving you the right kind of support? Well, no, you wouldn't. You'd think, well, when their contract runs out, I'm having a look elsewhere. So I think we accept a lot more when it's us, I find, on a personal level. So I think, move around, because of course, yes, there are private menopause specialists, but that comes at a cost and not everyone can afford it.
Yeah.
Worth looking at the British Menopause Society. They've got some really good advice on there, and they've actually got a patient arm called Women's Health Concern. And the NICE guidelines, which is the National Institute for Care Excellence. If you Google that, they've got a whole section on advice around menopause, and they're very clear, in fact, for things like anxiety or low mood, that rather than going straight to antidepressants, if a woman is of a certain age, then perhaps the hormonal approach is more appropriate. So if you arm yourself, then that means, just like going into a meeting at work, you're going to feel much more prepared and able to have that conversation on the same level.
That's absolutely true. Actually, I know nothing to do with the menopause, but I know when I was having my children, I didn't realize I had a choice on where I wanted to give birth. And I just assumed that the hospital they assign you to is the one that they assign you to.
Right.
It was only when I had my second, I was told that you have a choice where you want to give birth. Obviously, within reason, it can't be like 50 miles away. But,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it is really about arming yourself with the information and researching before you get to the doctor. And that's with most things, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Jackie, you talk about diet and nutrition, obviously. I wanted to know, does your past bad habits have an impact on the effects of perimenopause and menopause in terms of the symptoms, or can that be changed as you go along?
Well, it sort of depends what you mean about past bad habits.
I mean, things like eating badly, drinking, a lot, you know, in your 20s, 30s. Some people go out drinking a lot with their friends, after work do's, whatever that might be, smoking, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of depends to what degree all of that's been going on. And it also depends on you individually. You know, some people are just more indestructible than others.
Yeah.
Um, because bad habits, depending on what they might be, can have a big impact, for example, on the gut microbiome.
Mm.
So that bacteria, the beneficial bacteria in the gut, that not only supports our digestive function in terms of stool formation and everything working well, but also really important for nutrient absorption. If you're not absorbing nutrients correctly, then you're low in one or other thing, then that's going to cause more imbalances. Um, that said, I mean, most of us have had a rip-roaring time in our 20s, let's face it, and you go on and you're perfectly fine, because I think it tends to be a little bit self-limiting. I mean, I do remember when I hit 30, suddenly discovering this thing called a hangover that I'd never had in my life before that.
Yeah.
And as a result, sort of adjusted my behavior. So I think we tend to grow up in lots of ways. And so that sort
Yeah.
of gradual improvement we make will help. But if you sort of hit perimenopause and you are in full stress mode and you're still eating the same way you did when you were 25 and sort of coming home and having cereal for dinner because there's nothing in the house and you don't know when the last time you ate a vegetable was, then yeah, your chances are you're sort of letting yourself in for a pretty rough time. But the good news is that changing things can make a difference really quite quickly. So people shouldn't worry and think, oh goodness, I was a bit of a party person back in the day. Well, that's not the end of the world. It's always time to change things around.
Yeah.
But it's really important to start taking, I think, real responsibility and understanding the connection between what you put in your mouth and the impact that that has on your body, both in terms of your hormone balance, your symptoms, your productivity, and everything else around that.
What kind of things do you think women could do in terms of their nutrition? What top things could they make changes to?
Right, let's get cracking. Well, I think the place I always start is getting the basics right, because we're a bit of a quick fix generation. We just sort of want that, the latest. Oh, can I take that powder from that mountain village in the Himalayas and that'll sort everything out?
Yeah.
Well, there are some great micronutrients out there. There are some fantastic plant compounds that can make a difference. But first, you've got to get the basics of the macronutrients right. And in my experience, certainly it's what I see in my nutrition clinic, we muck that up all the time. I mean, the first thing is that when I say macronutrients, I mean proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Now, women are notoriously bad at getting enough protein. We're rubbish at it. Men have much greater instinct about protein. I think they know instinctively that it's affecting their muscles, so they take a dim view of any meal that isn't overtly full of something protein rich.
Yeah.
We, on the other hand, might be a bit of toast for breakfast, if we even have breakfast, leafy green salad at lunch because we're on another diet, and then finally a bit of, pathetic chicken in the evening or something. And it's just not enough. We need protein for numerous things. We need protein for our bones. Every single cell in the body, our entire DNA is made of protein. So our bones are made of protein. And most people know that as you go through the menopause, you start to get run the risk of low bone density as time goes on, which as you get older, of course, can be a potential problem if you fall over. We can lose up to 40% of our muscle mass by the time we've gone through the menopause, because that drop in estrogen affects our muscles. And so we need to be thinking hard about the foods that we're eating to support muscle tone. We need muscle, for example, because our skin, our hair, and our nails are made of a type of protein called keratin. And our body's job is to keep us alive. So if you're not getting enough protein, it will prioritize your heart, your lungs, your liver. It won't care that your hair's looking a bit rubbish, your nails are splitting, because that's not going to kill you. But it might sort of kill you, if you see what I mean, because you're hating your hair looking awful. So are you giving your body the raw materials to do the job? And we really need protein because the amino acids found in protein-rich foods are used by the body to create key neurotransmitters that regulate things like mood and memory and focus and concentration, all those things that we so often struggle with as we go through perimenopause. So protein with every meal and every snack. And when I say protein, it's of course the obvious meat, fish, eggs, but also lots of plant proteins. There's something for everyone. Nuts and seeds, pulses, lentils, chickpeas, beans, soya. So things like tofu, for example, or tempeh. Quinoa is a fantastic source of plant protein. So protein with every meal and snack. You'll feel stronger, you'll feel more physically and mentally robust. Your body will be able to start, your skin will start to glow again, your hair will grow again. So protein's important, but so are the other two. My generation, I'm 57 now, we grew up with the sort of whole low fat thing. So fat was demonized. And if it wasn't called fat, we wouldn't all get so confused. The first thing the body does with fat is not turn it into fat cells. The first thing the body does with fat is it creates hormones, and sex hormones at that. And if ever there was a time when we needed our sex hormones, well, it's because we go through perimenopause because they're all over the place. So, a very low fat diet is not a smart move. So thinking about having good quality fats in your diet, omega-3 in the form of salmon, other oily fish like sardines or mackerel, flaxseed is a great source of omega-3, sprinkling some flaxseed over your breakfast, for example, could be a good shout. And then finally carbohydrate, which I think is much more the sort of recent bad guy on the block, because we're avoiding our carbs because carbs make us fat. Well, yes, but carbohydrate is also the body's primary source of energy. If you're tired all the time, are you actually getting enough carbohydrate? And worth knowing that carbohydrate's a broad church. It's not just donuts and bread. It's also whole grain foods like wholemeal bread or brown rice. It's also lentils, chickpeas, beans, that kind of starch. Fruit and vegetables are carbohydrates too. And the body needs all of those. Again, important to know, a lot of people don't realize that actually the brain is entirely reliant on glucose as a source of energy. Nothing else will get through the blood-brain barrier. And so, if you're not getting enough carbohydrate and you're struggling with some of those mental health issues around cognition and concentration that I talked about, well, are you feeding your brain? So just getting those basics right straight away. And if people are thinking, well, how do I do that? If you think of your plate at lunch or dinner, a quarter of it should be protein. And the great thing is that foods that contain protein contain fat, so yay for that. A quarter of it should be starchy carbs, so the likes of bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, for example, just a quarter. And then half the meal should be all the vegetables. That's where all the brilliant micronutrients are, those mystery ingredients that also help with menopause. Because you see, if you're thinking about a fist-sized portion each time, then suddenly it's not half a plate of pasta. We don't need that. Most of us have a very sedentary lifestyle. You need just a quarter of the plate. So quarter of protein, quarter of starch, 2/4 vegetables. If you do that, you won't be going far wrong.
That's great. So in terms of your advice, what advice would you give to women? Your kind of top 3 things to do to start now on making an improvement on their lifestyle, whether that's to do with diet, nutrition. I'm assuming now, most women from the age of 35 onwards are probably experiencing perimenopause/menopause.
35 is early. I mean, anything under the age of 40 is considered premature menopause, and you would definitely need hormonal treatment.
Right.
Regardless, that's sort of medical advice. And until you got to the average age of menopause, which is 51 here in the UK, and then you would make your choice about whether you needed to continue it. Because in your 30s, your body is still expecting a certain level of estrogen and it won't function properly without it. But in your late 30s, again, often depending on your ethnicity, you might start to experience those symptoms. But certainly from the early 40s onwards, the majority of us, regardless of ethnicity, will be sort of lurking around that perimenopausal phase. So I
Yeah.
think the first thing to do, as I mentioned earlier, really is inform yourself. Forewarned is forearmed. So, even if you think, well, none of that sounds familiar to me just yet, but we don't have enough education out there. We learn about all sorts of other things, in sex education at school, but menopause is just not something that was covered when we were
Yeah.
at school. Yet, it's a big, big part of what's going on with you. They take a lot of time explaining to you puberty and the changes in your body. This is the reverse of puberty, and you need to think about how you're going to look after yourself, because self-care is really important. And we women are hardwired to look after everyone else. If you've got family, if you've got children, then you'll be focusing on them. You'll be dedicating a lot of time to your job if you're a professional woman. You might be thinking about elderly parents that you need to look after, or friends who are struggling. But you've got to think about yourself first. This is the time to really put yourself first. So arm yourself with knowledge and really look after that self-care. In terms of specifics, I've talked about the macros, so I won't repeat myself, but I maintain that that's really important. I'll give you a couple of other things to think about. One is bearing in mind that your metabolism changes. So audit your caffeine and your alcohol intake. Both of those are real killers when it comes to things like hot flushes, night sweats, insomnia, and other menopausal symptoms. And although you might think, but I've always had my cup of tea or coffee after dinner, it's not that that's affecting my sleep. Well, our ability to process caffeine, for example, depends on the status of an enzyme in the liver. And some of us have either more of it or a more effective pathway for it than others, which is why some people can only have caffeine up to lunchtime and others can have it all night and they'll still sleep like a baby. That changes as we go into menopause. So what worked before might not work now. You might find, that actually 4 o'clock's your cutoff point, or 12 could be a game changer for your sleep. And the same is true of the amount of alcohol you used to be able to drink. It can be, find that you react much less well to it. So start to ease back. Use a spirit measure at home if you're making a gin and tonic. Order glasses, not bottles, when you go out. Order a small glass. Just keep an eye on things. Don't say you can't ever have a drink, but really thinking about those things. And then the final thing I'd say is magnesium. Magnesium is every menopausal woman's best friend. Calms the nervous system, regulates the body's response to stress,
Yeah.
really helps you feel better equipped to cope with the challenges of daily life. And the best source of magnesium is leafy green veg. So things like spinach, rocket, kale, watercress, cabbage, broccoli, not strictly leafy, but very good. Couple of handfuls of those every day keep your magnesium levels boosted. It will make a big difference.
What would you say with magnesium supplements then, if there is such a thing?
There is. I mean, outside of a clinical context, I have to be careful about recommending supplements because it depends
Yeah.
on the medication you may or may not
Yeah.
be on. I would say this, that a really great thing to do is to have a magnesium bath. So Epsom salts, which you can buy super cheaply online. Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate. 2 or 3 handfuls in a bath, or a foot bath if you prefer. Soak for at least 20 minutes. The magnesium will absorb through the skin, really calm everything down, make you feel like a whole new person after a stressy day. If
Oh,
you're
wow.
thinking about magnesium supplements, a couple of thoughts. First of all, if you're on any medication, always check with your doctor first, because a lot of prescription medication can interact with nutrients when they're in intense form within the supplement. For example, blood pressure medication and magnesium don't get on well together. That's just one example. The maximum dose of supplement you should be taking for magnesium would be 400 milligrams. Too much magnesium can cause loose stools, so watch out for that. And certain forms of magnesium are more absorbable and less problematic to the gut than others. For example, both magnesium citrate and magnesium glycinate are more absorbable than magnesium oxide or magnesium sulfate. But magnesium citrate can also be a little bit of an irritant to a gut. So great if you've got constipation because it can speed up those bowel movements. But if you find that that's a bit irritating, glycinate's a better shout.
Yeah, the reason why I asked about the supplements is because I know you said you can get it through food, but some people, they'll be thinking, oh, let me just take a supplement because,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah,
why I wanted to talk.
absolutely. Yeah, you can't. I get asked every time I run a workshop,
Yeah.
so I know I just sort of tackle it head on. But bear in mind that highly concentrated supplements are powerful things. And that's not the same as having it in food form. So, for example, the leafy green vegetables I mentioned, they've got magnesium in, but they're also a one-stop shop for menopause-friendly nutrients. Because guess what? They contain twice as much calcium per 100 grams as milk. We know we need that for our bones. They've got the magnesium, which means we absorb the calcium. They've got the vitamin K2, which is also great for our bones. They're a fantastic source of iron, which if you're struggling with flooding during the perimenopause, then you might be borderline anemic. And they're a brilliant source of vitamin C, contain about twice as much vitamin C per 100 grams as an orange. And we need vitamin C, important one to finish on, because the body uses it to produce collagen. So rather than stuffing yourself with collagen tablets that the body doesn't know what to do with, because it's usually in a form it doesn't recognize, having vitamin C in your diet, the body will take it. It's like using the bricks to make the house rather than eating the house. And you need that to keep your skin plump and elastic. But you also need it because our bones require collagen as well as calcium. Calcium keeps them hard, collagen keeps them flexible so that we bounce and don't break if we fall over. So there's an argument, you see, for having the food because it's got everything in. The supplements only really on top of that if you're deficient.
I really wanted to address that because there's this, lots of people talk about supplements and it's not always a good thing to take. If you can, obviously it's different, like you said, if you're deficient and you need to take it, but there are alternatives. And like you mentioned, the alternatives provide an array of vitamins for your body, whereas that one supplement will just provide that one thing for you.
Exactly. And minerals work in opposition to each other. So, for example, sodium and potassium work in opposition to each other, copper and zinc. And if you think, I'm going to take loads of zinc because I've heard it's really good for my immune system, and you start stuffing yourself with highly concentrated zinc tablets, well, that's going to knock out the copper. If your copper's low, you'll experience a form of anemia and you will be on the floor with exhaustion. So getting the balance right is really important. And the great thing about food is that Mother Nature's worked out the balance already, so you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice there. So for people that perhaps can't afford to come to you or to go to take HRT or whatever that might be, are there any free resources for them to go to when they want to look at, their symptoms? I know you mentioned a few earlier, and also things related to their diet and nutrition, changes people can make to help them with any symptoms that they might have. And to be honest, personally, I think making changes with, as you're getting older anyway, making changes with your diet and nutrition is going to be beneficial on all sorts of levels anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of free resources, I've got loads on my website, which is well-well.co.uk. For example, I've got my podcast, The Happy Menopause, which is all about the diet and lifestyle side of things. I've recorded some videos called the Menopause Minute. So if you're busy and think, well, I haven't got time for a 30-minute podcast, you could listen to the one on constipation, or you could watch the one on bloating or whatever your symptom happens to be. And in a minute, I just give you my top tips. There's lots of articles on there. I have written a book called The Happy Menopause, which of course isn't free, but it's a lot cheaper than coming to see me in my clinic. So, that would be a start.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect. And if anyone's listening, definitely go to the website. There will be plenty of resources for you to go through. Just lastly, Jackie, I'm a huge fan of collaboration. So I wanted to ask you what collaboration opportunities you might be looking for, whether that's personally or professionally.
Well, I work with a lot of organizations, for example, because menopause in the workplace is such a big thing now. And so I'm often sort of brought in to talk about nutrition and so on. So I suppose I'm always looking for those kind of collaborations because I think that it's an area that's sorely neglected and people are always interested in understanding, how the nutrition side of things works. So I suppose, that would be an area I'd be looking at.
That's great. Jackie, thank you so much for being on the Empower Her podcast. It's been super insightful.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I love chatting to you. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Empower Her.
I hope today's episode has left you feeling inspired and motivated to make a positive difference in your world. Please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who will find it helpful. Until next time, keep striving for positive change and greatness for all women.